So no conversation around sleep would be complete without a discussion of our circadian rhythms. If we were to break this term down, the word circadian comes from the Latin circa, meaning approximately, and diem, meaning day. So our circadian rhythms are the biological rhythms or the biological clocks within us that span approximately 1 day in time. They're most commonly associated with their most obvious outward manifestation, which is the time at which we wake up and the time at which we sleep every single day. However, these systems are associated with many, many more biological functions that touch every organ, every system, and every cell of our bodies. We first discovered circadian clocks in animals and then humans. And what we found is that when you put people into environments, such as a cave setting, many of the functions of the body, they still maintain a 24-hour rhythmicity, and that is in the absence of all external cues from the environment. So it began, scientists started to look or hunt for a mechanism within the brain that was controlling the output of the different biological systems over a 24-hour period. In the 20th century, they discovered what is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN for short. It's a small pea-shaped gland within the brain just behind the forehead of the eyes, and it acts as the conductor of our circadian orchestra. What do I mean by this? Well, let's use the analogy of a conductor within a regular orchestra. The cello, the violin, the piano, all of the artists, all of the musicians who come together to play incredible works, incredible pieces of music, they do so because the conductor is controlling the timing of all of the different instruments and the musicians playing those instruments. And so it creates a beautiful sound. But without the conductor, we see desynchronization of all the different sounds. And so what was a beautiful piece of artwork becomes a collection of pots and pans and noises which aren't synchronized together. And the same thing happens within our circadian system. So when the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN, when this is correctly orchestrated, and it does this by its connection with different factors in our environment, things that we call Zeitgebers, a German word which means time cues, then when the major conductor of the orchestra, and he's working with the different organs and the systems of the body, being the musicians and the instruments, when everything is playing in concert together, then we have great health, we have equilibrium, we're able to thrive and be vital. But as soon as the timing of our circadian rhythm is disrupted by external factors in our environment, then we have challenges. We have what is called circadian rhythm disruption, or CRD, which has been associated with many short and long-term health consequences. So if we have disruptions to our biological clocks and to these 24-hour systems that govern all the repair and the regulation, the production of energy and the function of all the cells and the organs and the systems in the body, especially the timing at which we wind down and the timing that we get energized at the beginning of the day, then we have a lot of challenges. In the short term, it can lead to fatigue, it can lead to mood disturbances, it can lead to a lack of energy, that can cause us to perform poorly in our work, have struggles with our relationships, maybe in school and academic attainment. In the long term, circadian rhythm disruption has been linked to almost every chronic disease that exists, from obesity to diabetes, heart conditions, autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, and even learning and behavioral difficulties. So make no mistake, protecting, enhancing our circadian rhythms and the 24-hour clocks that live within every organ, system, and cell of our body is vitally important work, not only if we want to sleep well, but also if we want to thrive in every day of our lives. So what controls the circadian rhythm? The circadian rhythm is controlled by external cues in our environment that we call Zeitgebers. In our external environment, for hundreds of thousands of years, where we as human beings lived in bands or tribes as hunter-gatherers, there were very, very predictable changes to our daily environment across weeks, months, and seasons of the year. Some of these factors, like light exposure, the temperature in the environment, the timing that we ate and consumed food and water, how we socialized, as a tribe and with other human beings. The direct feedback of these different zeitgebers is what actually primes the circadian systems within us. So we have to understand and appreciate that for the vast majority of the time that we've existed as a species on planet Earth, almost 99.999% of that time, we lived outdoors in the natural environment, in bands as hunter-gatherers. We were not surrounded by artificial light, technology devices. We didn't have access to food and water at any time of the day or the night. So there were very specific timing to every behavior that we performed as human beings. And as a result, engaging with certain behaviors and certain factors in our environment at certain times, that programmed and instilled within us the mechanisms that allowed us to control the timing of different functions within our biology. So our circadian rhythms are controlled by two master hormones. The hormone cortisol, which you may have previously heard of, is one of 50 or so stress hormones that our body produces. In a natural, healthy 24-hour circadian rhythm, our body produces a large amount of cortisol immediately around the time that we wake up in the morning. Cortisol's role is immunoregulatory, so it supports our immune system and it also increases energy, focus, vitality, so that we previously could have gone out and hunted and fished and gathered and conducted all the activities that we needed to do every day to survive. And then over the course of the 24-hour period, cortisol levels decrease into the afternoon to make way for the other master circadian hormone that we call melatonin. Now, melatonin is often known as a sleep hormone, and it's true that melatonin is associated with the processes of repair and recovery that occur during sleep, but it is not the hormone that necessarily puts us to sleep. In each evening, as darkness approached in our natural environment, the sun would begin to set. The only light that we would have had access to was campfire light. And it's actually a darkness and an absence of all natural daylight and sunlight which allows a very special gland within our brain called the pineal gland to begin to release large amounts of melatonin into our bloodstream. Now, one of the major challenges that we have for our circadian rhythms in our modern day environment is that the time cues or the zeitgebers that we once came to expect ancestrally, they have been somewhat tampered with in the modern world. We're surrounded by very bright artificial light from our devices, our mobile phone screens, our laptops, and our economical home lighting. And the challenge with this type of light is that it does not replicate that which our circadian rhythms have come to expect throughout evolution. So this is one of the major challenges that we have. Perhaps the most disastrous impacts on our circadian rhythm come from a mismatch between the light environment that we came to expect throughout evolution and that which we currently have in the modern world. We also use technology at almost all times of day and night. Now, it's quite clear that our ancestors would never have had access to technology before the invention of computers, laptops, and these kinds of devices, but we are blissfully unaware in the 21st century of how stimulating our devices can be. Stimulating in relation to the type of light that screens emit and the influence that this has on our circadian systems, but also in terms of the content that we absorb. Whether it's social media, Netflix, watching television, entertaining ourselves, communicating, working, late into the evenings, the use of technology devices is very much at odds with the type of routine that we would have had evolutionarily when we existed as hunter-gatherers and when our environment really favored the synchronization of our body clocks and improvements in our sleep and overall health. So, the largest challenge that we face at the moment as it pertains to keeping our circadian rhythms healthy and well synchronized in order to encourage high quality sleep and recovery is our relationship to light. If I was to define light and ask you, what is light? If we were to Google the definition of light, we would be met with many different answers. We may think that light is what illuminates us, or we may think of a specific source of light, such as a torch or a flashlight or a firelight. That doesn't really give us enough information to understand how different types of light are interacting with our circadian rhythms. So in order to understand that, we really need to talk about two specific qualities of light. One of which is the color, or what we would refer to as the wavelength of light. And another is what we would call the illuminance, or that we measure and define through lux. So to talk first about colour, and to use an example of natural light in our everyday environment. Throughout the thousands of years that we evolved as hunter-gatherers, our circadian systems, via our eyes, which have a direct connection with the SCN, or the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is where the master clock of the circadian orchestra sits, were accustomed to very predictable light and dark cycles in our environment. Now, as the sun moves through the sky, from when it first reaches the horizon at sunrise until it sets at the other end of the day, the qualities of light given off by the sun and that are picked up by our eyes and our circadian systems are constantly changing. In the morning until the mid-afternoon, there is a very high amount of what we call blue light given off by the sun. So to define the colour blue and the wavelengths, if we were to look at something called the electromagnetic spectrum, we would see that there are different types of light. We have UV light, UVA and UVB light, which are given off by the sun during specific seasons of the year and at specific times of day. And then we have visible wavelengths of light, which range from the indigos and the violets down to the blues, greens, yellows, ambers and reds. And then the electromagnetic spectrum follows with infrared light. Now, in 1998, there was a groundbreaking discovery that was made where we discovered a very special photoreceptor in our eye called melanopsin. And we later went on to find melanopsin also in the skin as well as the eye. Now, melanopsin is found within what is called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or iPRGCs for short, that exist in the bottom area of our retina. And those specific types of cells, unlike the rod and the cone cells, which we'd have learned about in secondary school science, that are useful for helping us see form and colour, these specific photoreceptors, melanopsin or the iPRGCs, they're actually a blue light detector. So they're used to transmit a signal to the SCN in the brain, to the master clock, when our eyes sense a blue light signal in the environment. And it's these specific cells and this specific blue light signal which help to regulate or set the timing of our circadian clock. Now, when we understand that from the point of view of evolution and our natural light environment, every morning when the sun rose, we can now use a photospectrometer to measure this. Levels of blue light in the environment increase. And so nature, who never makes mistakes, was sending us direct signals via our eyes to the master clock of the brain that it's morning time. And so when we view this bright blue light out in our natural environment, the signals and the message that the circadian system within the brain receives is it's daytime. The result of this is an increase in cortisol, the hormone of energy and alertness and vitality, and a decrease or a suppression of melatonin, which is the hormone associated with winding down, resting and repairing. That's a fundamental inevitability of nature, that when we wake up and we go outside into nature, our system feels more alive, it feels more alert. And what happens at the other end of the day, as the sun begins to set, as it would have every single day for hundreds of thousands of years throughout our evolution, is that the blue light levels in the atmosphere begin to decrease until we reach sunset, following which there is almost zero blue light detectable in our atmosphere at all. That is the point at which the cells in the eye send a signal again to that master clock, informing it that nighttime is approaching. And so it's that absence of light, and in particular an absence of the blue light signals, that leads to a huge release of the hormone melatonin from the pineal gland. So as it is exposed to light, every single day our body expects a lot of bright natural light from the sun in order to awaken our circadian systems, to make us feel energized, vital, alert, focused, concentrated, so that we can go out and win in life. At the opposite end of the day, we need a decrease in not only the brightness, but also the levels of blue light in our environment. Outdoors in nature, that would have just been a part of everyday life. There was no opportunity for us to sit in front of a television, to use a smartphone, to turn on a lot of electric lighting within our home so that we could see and so that we could perform behaviors and conduct chores and do all the things that we modern human beings have to do in the evening. But these days, unfortunately, because of the proliferation of blue light in our modern living environments, this sends perhaps the most disruptive signal that there is to our circadian system, which creates a confusing mix match between the circadian system's understanding of whether it's day or night. So, a question for the viewer. If you now understand that our circadian system is here to detect blue light throughout the daytime, and that an abundance of blue light makes us feel alert and awake and alive, what do you think happens every evening if you sit in front of the television, if you stare into a device, a tablet, a laptop, a computer, or you just sit around bright, white LED lighting? I'll tell you what happens. Your body produces cortisol, which is an energizing hormone, at the wrong time of day, and it suppresses the release of melatonin. And what is the net effect of that? Instead of our body naturally wanting to wind down in those hours immediately after sunset, we become tired but wired. We want to go to sleep, but our mind is still awake. It's still racing. We maybe get to sleep because we're exhausted, but we wake up in the morning and we don't feel like we've slept well. We don't feel energized. Perhaps we press the snooze button on the alarm on our mobile phone or our alarm clock too many times before we wake up. We don't truly feel like we've slept. And the main problem associated with this is not only the timing of our sleep, which is often delayed later into the night because of disruptive light in our environment, but also the quality of the sleep that we achieve. So the more melatonin that we can release from our pineal gland in darkness every night, the greater quality rest and recovery that we're going to experience. So what can we do about this when it pertains to our light exposure? Well, whenever I work with clients, I give them some really foundational and important advice. There are many things that we can talk about as it pertains to sleep. And we've got a lot more advice coming up for you in this series. But the most fundamental thing you need to understand and appreciate is that your light environment is the master zeitgeber, or the master time cue, the master controller of your circadian systems. So every morning, whether rain or shine, I encourage you to spend some time outdoors. By outdoors, I mean in the back garden. I mean taking a walk to work. I mean spending some time away from devices, away from screens, away from glass, away from sunglasses even, to absorb these natural blue light frequencies that are in abundance in the atmosphere and in your environment, in order to trigger these cells in the eye that wake us up, that energize us, and that set the tone for our day by controlling the timing of our circadian rhythm. If it's overcast outside, you may need 20 minutes. You may need 30 minutes to get that same strength of signal as if it was a really bright, clear day outside, when even 5 or 10 minutes out in that warm sun is enough to wake up your circadian clock. As we reach the evening, it's actually fundamentally important that we spend some time outdoors around the time that the sun is setting, if we can. When we're outside around the time of sunset, the very specific qualities of light given off by the sun at that time of day are informing the circadian system within all of the cells of our body that it is about to be nighttime. So when you think about the lives of our ancestors, they spent all of their time outdoors. They most certainly weren't in direct contact with light at every moment of the day, but in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening, they all had exposure to natural light from the sun. Then they lit a beautiful fire. They gathered round, they danced, they sung, they told stories, they played games, they stared up at the beautiful unpolluted skies, and then they fell asleep. It's not the same for us now. And so we need to have an appreciation and an understanding of the contraindications that technology and modern lighting systems have on our circadian health and our sleep. So in the evenings, depending on how well you want to sleep, depending on how well intact you want your circadian rhythms to stay, there are a couple of levels of participation for how well you may want to adapt the lighting in your environment to support your sleep health. At the most basic level, you need to dim the lighting. That might look like turning down the brightness on your laptop, your smartphone, your television, your computer, perhaps even your tablet. But most especially, it looks like turning off overhead lighting, using dimmer switches, and using lighting around the house that is lower than eye level. Because we have to appreciate that the special photoreceptor cells in our eyes that are placed in the bottom of the retina are looking to pick up blue light signals from the upper atmosphere. So when we go outside for sunset, perhaps we walk into the back garden, or we step outside to get some natural light in our eyes, it's important that we've dimmed or turned off a lot of the bright lighting in the house so that when we return back indoors, a few hours before sleep, we're in a much darker environment. This darker environment will lead to greater production and release of melatonin from the brain that will help us not only to wind down more quickly, but also experience deeper and higher quality rest. Then it comes to filtering our device screens. So there are a variety of applications available. One of them is called Iris, another one is called Flux, and we'll include some of the links and the information in the associated post from this week. But ultimately, these applications allow us to filter the types of light coming in from our screen devices. So if, like most people, you still use a computer or a laptop or a mobile phone in the evening, you might not have to endure the bright blue light signal from a traditional unfiltered screen that is keeping your brain and body awake and alert past the time at which your circadian rhythm wants to be. So when you filter these devices, you can filter out the blue and even the green wavelengths, which are more stimulating and alerting, and opt for what we call a warmer screen tone. Ambers and reds, somewhat similar to that campfire around which we would have evolved. And it doesn't, as shown by science, have such a detrimental effect on the levels of melatonin that we release in the evening. The next level of participation, if you want to go further, I would recommend purchasing some red or some amber blue light blocking glasses. So these have been shown in peer-reviewed science to actually block the blue light signal from hitting our eyes. If you're the sort of person who likes to watch television or has to spend time around bright artificial lights in the evening, a pair of nighttime amber or red blue light blocking glasses could be a great ally in your search for better sleep. And finally, if you really want to take your circadian and sleep health to the max, I recommend not only dimming lighting in the house in the evening as you approach sunset, filtering your screens and using blue light blocking glasses, but I would also recommend considering to invest into some circadian friendly lighting. So there are a lot of great companies out there these days who sell amber or red light bulbs that can replace your traditional cool white LEDs. And the benefit of these is that they don't contain blue light. So in the absence of blue light, your body and your brain, your pineal gland, can release as much melatonin as humanly possible in order to encourage the deepest and highest quality recovery. Ultimately, light sculpts your sleep from the moment that you wake up until the moment that you drift off. The light that you view between waking and sleeping has a profound influence on your circadian rhythms, which control not only the quality of your rest and recovery, but also all of the other organs, systems, and cells within the body. We have to start with light. We need to understand that fundamentally it's our connection with light that shapes our sleep. So let's talk a little bit about food and sleep. Magnesium is one master relaxant mineral that many of us are deficient in within the 21st century. Magnesium is required for the balancing and the conductance of many different biochemical reactions with our nervous system, including those which lead us to be able to wind down, to think clearly, and to feel energized. The research is very clear that if you have a deficiency in magnesium, you may have difficulty in producing melatonin, and you may have difficulty in winding down, resting, relaxing and recovering in the evening. So one of the major things that I recommend to my clients as it pertains to food is the consumption of a magnesium supplement if you feel that your dietary intake does not, cover this requirement alone. Then another factor that we may talk about in relation to food, circadian rhythms and sleep is meal timing. Okay, so we have a master circadian clock within our brain that controls the function of all the different tissues, organs and cells of the body. But we also have peripheral clocks that exist within the different tissues and organs. Now we have clocks within our digestive system which are controlled by the intake of food. So when we think back evolutionarily, our ancestors would have consumed food within the hours of daylight. It became very difficult to eat, to prepare, to cook, and all those sorts of things once it got dark. These days, science studies this phenomenon in terms of what is called chrononutrition. So chrono from the Latin meaning time nutrition. Looking at what we call the eating window on a daily basis and how the timing of our meals influences our sleep quality and our metabolism. So what we're beginning to understand from this research is that actually eating more of our calories in the earlier part of the day, perhaps confined to a window of somewhere between 8 and 12 hours, can have huge benefits for our metabolism in terms of weight, waist circumference, blood pressure, blood glucose, other factors, as well as the quality of our sleep. One of the best recommendations I give to all of my clients is to try not to consume big, heavy meals close to sleeping. When we consume large meals close to bed, this disrupts the delicate energy balance within our body and the fuels and resources available for rest, recovery and repair. So my clients often find that once they consume a slightly smaller meal, maybe a few hours earlier than current, they begin already to get deeper sleep as a result of having a well-digested meal and balanced and even blood sugar levels. I also recommend that people try to avoid the refined sugars and the processed carbohydrates close to bedtime. Now, we're not here to, critique what you're eating, but I would suggest that you try to keep blood sugar levels balanced close to bed so that you aren't waking up during the night hungry, thirsty, or stressed as a result of cortisol and adrenaline imbalances that can happen when your blood sugar levels dip. That certainly doesn't mean that you can never enjoy some, ice cream as dessert or a late meal out with friends, but it can be really beneficial if for the majority of the week you can keep food timing within an 8 to 12 hour window and try to consume your dinner meal a few hours, say 3 to 4 if possible, before bed. So let's talk now a little bit about caffeine. So caffeine is a very loaded topic. I've been known to lose friends around this conversation. I drink caffeine myself, just to let you know. So this is not coming from the view of somebody, 10,000 feet up on a mountain who is giving advice that they can't possibly relate to. Caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. So what many people don't realize is that when we consume caffeine, it increases levels of cortisol and adrenaline, two stress hormones within the body. For the majority of people, a cup of coffee or a dose of caffeine from tea or cacao or chocolate or even supplements in the morning can lead to increases in focus and alertness that can help us throughout the day. But for smaller groups of people who are very sensitive to caffeine, sleep can be disrupted. In particular, caffeine consumed in the afternoon, the early evening, or the evening can lead the body to a state of hyperarousal that makes it more difficult to wind down in the evening. So I say to people, you really need to consider caffeine consumption on a case-by-case basis. Some of your friends may be very insensitive to caffeine. They may be able to drink lots of caffeine and still sleep well and feel perfectly balanced and not necessarily very stressed. Whereas other people who experience sleep debt or sleep deprivation and who have a tendency to feel more stressed or anxious or hyper-aroused can really feel the side effects of caffeine consumption later into the afternoon. So a couple of my top tips for your caffeine consumption. Personally, I have a hard stop on caffeine at noon. The reason that I stop caffeine at noon or midday is because the half-life of caffeine, which varies from person to person, can be somewhere between about 6 and 12 hours. So I know that if I'm aiming to go to bed at 10 p.m. at night and I have my last dose of caffeine at midday, I've got about a 10-hour period to clear the majority of that caffeine out of my system so it doesn't keep me alert and hyper-aroused into the evening. Another piece of advice I usually give to people is not to consume caffeine immediately upon waking. So actually going out into natural light can help the body to regulate cortisol production and increase energy-related hormones and neurotransmitters so that you can feel alert and vibrant and ready to conquer the day without caffeine. Then, mid-morning caffeine consumption can be a nice addition to the day as opposed to something that we rely on to feel energized. I also recommend people to break the habit by replacing the habit. So as human beings, we are incredibly habitual creatures. If you work in an office environment or surrounded by a team, it may be a case that every time someone goes to the kettle to fill up their tea or coffee mug, that another one arrives on your desk. The problem with overconsumption of caffeine is that our body becomes habituated to not only just the caffeine itself, but also the ritual of having the hot drink. So some people benefit from herbal teas, flavored waters, or other types of drinks that are non-caffeinated and that can help us to replace the repetitive consumption of coffees, teas, and other caffeinated beverages throughout the day. Then finally, I say to people, try not to over-caffeinate if you are particularly sleep deprived. I know that this one might sound slightly counterintuitive, as when we're tired, when we're exhausted, when we're sleep deprived, we may crave more caffeine to help us get through the day. But the problem is that can be a little bit like pouring fuel onto a bonfire. Really, if we want to put a fire out, we need to take the fuel away. So if we want to decrease stress and we want to deal with sleep deprivation and set ourselves up for a beautiful evening wind down the following day, after perhaps we've slept poorly the night before, consuming less caffeine can help us to stay more balanced and more energized. And it's much better replaced by extra breaks outside, lots of fresh air, lots of natural light, and ways that we can naturally energize our systems. So another very strong zeitgeist or time cue that influences our circadian systems is temperature. So our core body temperature actually fluctuates by a very small amount, in a few degrees, over the course of the 24-hour day. And this really coincides with changes in the environmental temperature. So you have to think about it this way. When we used to live outdoors in our natural environment, the temperature would rise and fall over the 24-hour period, depending on whether it was light or dark, day or night. In the evening, our body expects a natural decrease in the temperature in our environment, which allows for our core body temperature to also decrease. Science is showing that when we decrease our core body temperature, we can actually access deeper states of sleep. Okay, so in the evening, I make a couple of recommendations around temperature. I tell people, be very careful with the clothing that you wear to bed. If you feel like you get too warm during the night, the problem with additional clothing or too many duvets or too thick a duvet is that the body can't release heat from its core. So we cannot vasodilate and decrease our core body temperature. And if you're waking up during the night feeling hot, sweating and such like that, this will lead to lesser sleep quality. Another thing I say to people as it pertains to temperature in the environment is to try to keep windows ajar at night. So allow some fresh air, some ventilation to come into the room, because this helps to recreate a more natural sleep environment where even if, we're under the covers and we're feeling very warm and cozy, our body or our skin can at least sense a separation or a change in environment in terms of the temperature. Interestingly, as it pertains to taking warm baths or showers in the evening, many people think that this would increase your core body temperature and lead you to get hotter. But somewhat counterintuitively, when we sweat or when we get warm in the evening, this actually vasodilates us. So it allows more of our core body temperature heat to come to the surface and to be expelled through our skin. So this helps us to actually lower our core body temperature. So having a warm bath in the evening, having a warm shower can lead to deeper sleep as a result of more heat being expelled from the body when we finally get out of that warm bath or shower. And finally, speaking to some of the people who have challenges regulating their core body temperature, there are now a lot of devices on the market, which you can look into, that help to regulate the temperature of your mattress or your duvet in order to encourage your body to expel heat in the evening so that you can get cooler and so that you can sleep more deeply. It's kind of an old wives' tale that, when someone's stressed, they're hot-headed. But it's very true that when we are stressed in the evening, or when we are warm in the evening, this actually increases levels of stress hormones within the body. So in order for us to increase the production of melatonin, or the release of melatonin from the pineal gland as best we can, we need not only a dark environment, but we also need a cool environment. Thinking back again ancestrally, our ancestors would have lived in darker and colder environments, especially in the evenings, that would have led them to wind down, relax, and prepare for sleep. So one of the enemies of sleep in the modern world is stress. What does the term stress mean? I believe stress was coined by the Hungarian physiologist called Hans Selye. And I once listened to an interview where Hans Selye said that if he understood the English language better, he would have used the word strain and not the word stress. So we've developed this idea of stress, that stress is the boogeyman. Stress should be avoided at all costs. But in fact, stress or strain describes situations and circumstances in our life that bring inherent meaning to every day. So it's less about deleting, eliminating, or removing stress from our lives, and it's more about learning how to manage, cope with, and appropriately respond to stress. One of the biggest challenges that we have when it comes to stress is that, quite frankly, the best way for us to reduce it, manage it, and perhaps at times avoid it has been hiding right underneath our nose this entire time. By that, I mean regulating our breathing patterns. So these days, you've probably been living under a rock if you haven't become aware of the term breath work, or an understanding that certain breathing practices can help us to become more energized, or to relax, or to wind down. So I encourage all of the clients that I work with to do some investigation into their breathing patterns, to understand whether they're breathing through their mouth or through their nose. Because when you breathe through the nose, you breathe into the abdomen and you activate a nerve, the vagus nerve, which helps to wind us down and transition us into the rest and digest state of our nervous system. When we breathe through our mouths, quite shallow into our upper chest, this can really exacerbate stress and lead to more of a fight or flight system activation, where we have higher levels of stress hormones that can impede sleep. So one of the simplest ways that we can help to cool down, both mentally and physically, in the evenings is to become aware of our breathing patterns. I encourage all of my clients to breathe in and out through the nose, into the belly or the area of the diaphragm, and also to focus on elongating and slowing down the exhalations. So when we breathe in, the system becomes more energized and more stressed. And when we breathe out, we have an opportunity to slow things down and to lower stress hormones and to better prepare us for sleep. Even laying down in bed for 5 minutes before you go to bed at night, closing your eyes, focusing on your breathing, in and out through the nose, down into the belly, slowing down the exhalation, can be just the recipe to help you drift off into a deep sleep. Thank you so much for joining us for Healthspan's sleep series. We would really love to hear from you. So if you have any questions that you'd like to follow up with myself or other members of the team, please submit them and we will do our best to answer them over the coming weeks.